this some kind of joke?" The voice, sharp and laced with the easy arrogance of youth, cut through the low hum of the advanced training facility. "Can we help you, Grandpa? The VFW hall is a few miles down the road." Kyle, his jaw tight and a sheen of sweat on his brow, gestured dismissively with a hand still clenched from gripping the cold stock of his rifle. He and his fire team, all sculpted muscle and cutting-edge gear, had been struggling for the better part of an hour with the range's new pride and joy, the Odysseus simulation. It was a sniper's nightmare, a 2,000-meter shot with a wind simulation so complex and variable it felt alive, actively malicious. Their multi-million-dollar optics and ballistic computers were struggling to keep up, and their pride was taking a beating. The last thing any of them needed was an audience, especially one that looked like he'd wandered in from a casting call for a war movie from the 1950s. The old man, Frank Peterson, didn't flinch. He just stood there, a little stooped, hands tucked into the pockets of a faded olive-drab field jacket that had seen better decades. His jeans were worn thin at the knees, and his boots were cracked leather, the kind of comfortable, broken-in footwear that spoke of long miles traveled over a lifetime. He looked thin, almost frail, with a web of fine lines around eyes that seemed to hold a quiet, patient depth. He offered no defense, no snappy retort. He simply gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, his gaze drifting from the flustered young seals to the distant, shimmering digital target on the massive screen at the far end of the range. The silence that followed was more unnerving to the young commandos than any shouted reply would have been. It was a silence that didn't feel weak. It felt weighted, ancient. It was the silence of a mountain that feels no need to justify its existence to the passing clouds. The other SEALs exchanged smirks, their frustration finding an easy, inappropriate target. This was better than failing the simulation, a little comic relief. From the elevated control booth overlooking the range, Master Chief Callahan watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of unease. He was a man carved from the same granite as the institution he served, with 2 decades of service etched into his face. He was training this new batch of SEALs, shaping them into the finely honed weapons the nation required. He knew their arrogance was a byproduct of their immense capability, a necessary armor. But respect was non-negotiable. He didn't know the old man, but he was on a secure naval special warfare base. No one just wandered in. The old man's presence was authorized, even if it was inexplicable. Callahan raised a pair of high-powered binoculars not to look at the target, but at the visitor. He focused on the old man's posture. Beneath the stoop of age, there was a structure, a peculiar stillness. The man wasn't just standing, he was observing. His head was canted just so, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. His eyes weren't just looking. They were scanning, assessing, gathering data in a way that felt chillingly familiar to Callahan. It was the practiced economic gaze of a hunter. The young SEALs, oblivious, continued their attempts. The crack of the .338 Lapua Magnum echoed, followed by the frustrating digital zing of a near miss displayed on the monitor. The simulated wind, generated by a complex algorithm based on real-world chaotic weather patterns, was a ghost they couldn't pin down. "It's shifting too fast," another SEAL, Diaz, muttered, pulling his eye from the scope. "The computer can't even model it in real time." Kyle slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle with more force than necessary. "It's a garbage system. No one can make this shot. His eyes flicked back to the old man who had shifted his weight slightly. As he did, the cuff of his worn jacket slid back an inch, revealing a sliver of his wrist. Callahan instinctively tightened the focus on his binoculars. He saw it. It wasn't a unit insignia or a common military tattoo. It was a faded, blue-black symbol, blurred by time, a stylized serpent coiled around a single, silent feather. Callahan felt the air leave his lungs. His blood turned to ice water. He'd only seen that symbol once before in a heavily redacted intelligence file during a briefing at Dam Neck. It was a ghost symbol, a marker from a program that officially never existed. A program whispered about in hushed tones by the old-timers, a legend of men who operated so far in the black that their own shadows didn't have clearance. Quote. Callahan's voice boomed over the intercom, sharper than he intended. Quote 3. But it was too late. Kyle, high on frustration and testosterone, had already decided to make the old man the centerpiece of his performance. He saw Callahan's warning not as an order to be obeyed, but as a challenge to his own authority within his team. He swaggered over to Frank, the epitome of youthful power confronting aged irrelevance. "You know, I've been watching you watch us," Kyle said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You look like you got it all figured out. You think you could do better, old-timer?" He unslung his rifle, a marvel of modern engineering worth more than the car Frank probably drove. "Here." He thrust the weapon towards Frank. "Show us how it's done. Bet you can't even lift it, let alone see the target." The other SEALs chuckled, a low rumble of shared mockery. They saw a frail old man being offered a god-killer of a weapon. They saw a joke. Callahan, frozen in the booth, saw sacrilege. He saw a child handing a lit match to the god of fire. Frank looked from Kyle's smug face to the rifle. He didn't say a word. For a long moment, he just looked at the weapon, his gaze tracing its lines. Then, slowly, he reached out. His hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, closed around the rifle. And in that moment, everything changed. The way he took the weapon wasn't the fumbling grasp of an old man. It was a fluid, certain motion. His fingers instinctively found their correct placement on the stock, the grip, the receiver. He balanced it effortlessly, the 15 pounds of metal and glass becoming a seamless extension of his body. The SEALs' laughter died in their throats, replaced by a confused silence. The air in the room thickened. Frank moved toward the shooting mat, and the shuffle in his step was gone. He moved with a low, predatory grace, his body sinking into the prone firing position as if he were pouring himself into the earth. The transformation was absolute. The stooped, frail grandfather vanished, and in his place was something else, something terrifyingly competent. As he settled behind the rifle, his cheek finding the stock, the world outside fell away. The scent of gun oil and the cool metal against his skin were a homecoming. The high-tech range faded, replaced for a heartbeat by a different memory, sharp and violent. He was on a dusty rooftop in a forgotten corner of the world, the sun beating down, the smell of spices and fear in the air. Below, a compromised CIA asset was being dragged toward a waiting car. An entire intelligence network was about to collapse. His partner was whispering wind calls in his ear, not from a computer, but from watching dust devils and the flutter of a prayer flag 2 blocks away. The target was moving, shielded by civilians, the wind a treacherous serpent coiling through the alleyways. It was an impossible shot, a shot that couldn't be missed. He remembered the burn of the sun on his neck, the grit of sand between his teeth, the absolute stillness he had to find within the storm of his own pounding heart. He remembered the pull, the recoil, the silence that followed. He remembered saving a life and damning a soul with one single, perfect, terrible piece of physics. He blinked, and the rooftop was gone. He was back in the sterile, air-conditioned range. The digital wind howled through the speakers, but to him it was just noise. He wasn't listening with his ears. His eyes, those patient, observant eyes, scanned the periphery. He saw the subtle dance of a loose strap on a piece of equipment, the almost imperceptible flutter of a paper target left up on an adjacent lane. He was reading the real air currents in the room, the micro-eddies created by the ventilation system, feeling how they would interact with the simulated chaos. He ignored the advanced heads-up display in the multi-thousand-dollar scope. His fingers, deft and sure, made tiny, almost invisible adjustments to the elevation and windage turrets. He wasn't calculating. He was feeling. He was having a conversation with the distance, with the air, with the bullet itself. He took one slow, deep breath, his chest barely rising. He let half of it out, finding that perfect, silent space between heartbeats. The range, already quiet, seemed to hold its breath with him. Then a single, sharp crack echoed through the cavernous space. For a moment, nothing happened. The SEALs stared at the main screen, expecting to see the digital tracer veer off course, to hear the mocking zing of a miss. Instead, there was a flash, dead center in the digital target's head. A perfect bullseye, a 1 in a million shot placed with surgical, impossible precision. A wave of stunned disbelief washed over the young operators. Their mouths hung open. Kyle stared, his face pale, the smug arrogance completely wiped away, replaced by a raw, gaping confusion. "Quote 4, he stammered, his voice a choked whisper. "Quote 5, Diaz, looking from the screen to the old man now slowly pushing himself up from the mat, asked the question that hung in the air, his voice full of awe and confusion. Quote 6. It was a rhetorical question. They all knew who pulled the trigger. They just couldn't comprehend it. It was like watching a house cat take down a rhinoceros. The heavy door to the control booth slammed open. Master Chief Callahan strode onto the range floor, his boots echoing with purpose. His face was a mask of pure, undiluted reverence. He didn't even glance at his team of bewildered super soldiers. His eyes were locked on Frank, who was now standing, the rifle held loosely in one hand. Callahan marched directly to him, stopped 3 feet away, and his body snapped into the most rigid, formal position of attention he had ever held. His back was ramrod straight, his chin tucked, his hands pinned to his sides. "Quote 7, he barked. The words cracked the stunned silence like a whip. The SEAL's confusion morphed into utter shock. Sir? They called him Master Chief. He called Admiral Sir. Who was this old man that their hardened, combat-proven instructor was addressing with such profound, trembling deference? Kyle felt a cold dread creeping up his spine, the horrifying realization that he had just stepped on something he couldn't even comprehend. As if on cue, the bay doors at the end of the facility rolled open, and a black, immaculate sedan with government plates glided to a halt. A driver hopped out and opened the rear door. A man in a crisp service dress, white uniform emerged, the 4 gleaming stars on his shoulder boards catching the light. It was Admiral Harrison, the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command himself. He had been scheduled to inspect the new Odysseus system. He took in the scene at a glance. The stunned SEALs, the reverent Master Chief, and the quiet old man in the faded jacket holding the rifle. The Admiral's stern, professional demeanor dissolved. A look of genuine shock, followed by a warm, respectful smile, spread across his face. He strode forward, his pace quickening, walking right past the SEALs as if they were part of the furniture. "Frank," he said, his voice booming with a warmth and familiarity that was jarringly out of place. "Frank Peterson, my God, I had no idea you were on base. It is an honor, truly." He extended his hand, not as a superior, but as a junior meeting a legend. Frank shook it with a simple, firm grip. The Admiral then turned his attention to the frozen statues in camouflage. His warm expression hardened into one of cold fury. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice low and dangerous, "I see you've had the privilege of meeting a living piece of our history, but from the looks on your faces, I suspect you failed to afford him the respect he is due." He paused, letting the weight of his words crush them. "You're wondering who this man is. You're wondering why your Master Chief just called him Sir. Let me educate you." He gestured towards Frank. "This is Frank Peterson. Before SEAL Team 6 was a line in a budget, before Delta Force was even a concept, there were men like him. He was part of a unit so secret we burned the records. They were called Ghosts, and their operational name was Project Whisper." The Admiral's eyes bored into Kyle. "That faded tattoo on his wrist? It's a serpent and a feather. It signifies a man who can strike with lethal silence from an impossible distance. It signifies a Master Warrant Officer 5, a special rank created for only 3 men, a rank that technically doesn't exist, but is afforded more respect in the circles that matter than any star on my shoulder." He wasn't finished. "That impossible shot you've been failing at all morning? This man made that exact shot for real in 1978. In a crosswind with a wooden stock rifle, to save a downed pilot who would later become the Secretary of the Navy. We teach that shot at Quantico and Coronado. We call it the Whisper Shot. We just don't tell the students the name of the man who took it, because his entire career is classified above your pay grade." The Admiral stepped closer to his men, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You stand here with your computers and your carbon fiber, thinking you are the tip of the spear. Men like Frank Peterson forged the spear, with nothing but iron will and a profound understanding of the wind." He turned back to Frank, his entire posture changing from one of command to one of deep respect. He raised his hand to his brow and executed the sharpest, most meaningful salute of his 4-decade career. Master Chief Callahan, his eyes shining, mirrored the action perfectly. A beat of silence passed, and then Kyle, his face streaked with tears of shame, snapped to attention and saluted. One by one, Diaz and the rest of the team followed, their hands trembling, saluting the quiet, unassuming old man who had shattered their world. Frank didn't revel in the moment. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a deep, weary patience. He returned the salute with a slow, tired nod of his head, an acknowledgment that was both a thank you and a dismissal. The ceremony was unnecessary. The respect was all that mattered. He then looked directly at Kyle, the source of the initial disrespect. His voice, when it finally came, was raspy from disuse, but steady and clear. "The wind," he said softly. "You were fighting it. You can't fight it, son. You have to listen to it. Let it tell you where the bullet needs to go. He offered a small, forgiving smile that held no malice, only the wisdom of a long, hard life. It was a lesson, not a rebuke. He then turned to the Admiral, handing the advanced rifle back as if it were a simple tool. "Just came to see the new toys, George," he said. "Make sure they're teaching the boys the right things." The Admiral placed a hand on his old friend's shoulder. "They are now, Frank. They are now." The two men walked towards the sedan, leaving a team of humbled SEALs standing in the middle of the range, their world completely reoriented. They had just learned the most important lesson of their careers. The most dangerous man in the room is never the one who tells you he is. True strength is quiet. True honor is humble. And true heroes often wear nothing more than a faded old jacket.